Hello, hello. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here on the Gulf Coast. And thank you for joining this morning for the weekly reading of um, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Um, I typically like to take a couple of seconds and let the streams come through, make sure that everybody is tuned in and that everybody can hear me loud and clear. Um, and Looks like we're good on some of the platforms. Let me just make sure that we're good on Rockfin. Okay, we're live on Rockfin as well now. Um, so I just wanted to thank you all for supporting us and for continuing to tune in. This will be the fifth installation, the fifth week that I'm reading from The Great Taking, David Rogers Webb's book about the financial thievery that's going on in the country right now and in the world. And before I start, I wanted to basically talk about how the um, how the Great Taking is much more mundane than you might think. I know there are a lot of content creators, a lot of podcasters, and a lot of people out there that are offering really good information about this sort of financial reset that we're all going through. And they bring in a lot of complicated and, you know, they overshare and it gets really complicated. And I would, right. And this JP's with me today. So for a couple of minutes, and he'll probably head back to his office when I start reading. But before I start reading from the first chapter, because we did finally make it through the prologue. So the first 4 weeks were me reading the prologue, which was David Rogers Webb's background and how he came to be such an expert in finance. So we're finally able to begin the first chapter this week. But before we do that, I want to just give you some examples of this mundane, of the mundane that I'm talking about, how we're financially just really strangled through these things that you don't even think about. So first, let's talk about. I just want to make sure that we're live here. So first, let's talk about. Hang on a second. Am I even live on YouTube? Yeah, looks like I am. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. So first, let's talk about something really mundane, like gas charges. So the first time JP and I discovered that there was a hold on our account for like $100 or something.
Yeah, it was like $100, $125, something like that. I went to go get gas.
Mhm.
We were in Pennsylvania still, and I think you were with me, and you looked at the receipt, and you're like, or you looked at something. You looked at the bank account, I think, after I got the gas. And you're like, what is this? It's from the same company that we bought the gas from, and it was $100. And so we were still at the gas station, so I went in with the receipt, and I'm like, what is this all about? And the girl told me that they put holds on the purchase. And I thought, well, that's a really weird thing. I mean, I can, from a business perspective, I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, I was talking to Julie about it. I'm like, this is a poor community. This is a place. This is a way for them to. I mean, if you don't have enough money in your account, basically what happens is that you go overdrawn without even expecting it to happen, and so you end up getting dinged by your bank severely because you went over. You overdrew your account. And so you end up paying penalty charges and all these other things. And then that money eventually gets back in there. But if you don't have any backup funds, you're out some money. And if you were expecting to have that $100 in there to cover maybe another check or a bill or something that you had already planned to pay, then you're going to get into even more trouble with your bank. And so this is a way of keeping people poor, but also just punishing people for just being a consumer. And it's not, they're not doing it to punish people. They're doing it to make money. They're doing it, I guess, to cover, any sort of, expenses that might happen if that person was overdrawn in the first place. We stopped talking.
What about now? Can you hear us? Can you hear us now?
No. And that's on Facebook. And
how about now?
How about now on what about on YouTube? Are we getting through on YouTube?
I mean, this is everybody's responses. So how about now, guys? Anything? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, we're showing that we're
So are we okay, so now they can.
Oh, here.
Are we using the right?
No, we're not. We're using the wrong microphone. Okay, how about that?
Is that better?
Can you guys hear us now? What's weird is, okay, so we're getting a yes from YouTube. Okay, so B said yes. In Nature said yes. So that's YouTube. I don't know about Facebook.
All right, so you guys, how clear are we coming through? Is it clear? I really appreciate the feedback. You guys are great for letting us know so quickly that you can't hear us. Please keep typing in your messages and letting us know how clear we're coming through. Is it better now?
I'll take no answer as an answer, but
well, I mean, I typed it in. Is this better? We changed our output. Is this? Yes, it's clearer now, somebody says. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. It cut off when you were discussing the gas hold charges. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
That is really interesting. So that was just a couple of minutes of an interruption. I'm not going to restart the feed. And as Robert says, the sound was always good until it stopped. So it was good until it wasn't.
Until we started talking about the gas hold fees.
Right. So this is, and what I've shown here on the screen is something from Wallet Hub, which talks about how it could charge you up to $175. But what you guys need to understand is that when you go in and buy the gas and you say you spend $40 to fill up your gas tank, you will be charged and it will be authorized and it will be either charged to your credit card or debited from your debit card, which is always attached to your bank, right? That will automatically be authorized. But then you will also get an additional temporary authorization for $100, $175. and this is totally legal. And what JP and I were discussing this morning was that it seems more like a way for the companies to create something like a slush fund. And it feels really sketchy. It feels really like fraudulent.
Well,
so explain what you were saying to me this
Sure.
morning about
well, one of the things that we've learned, over the years is, that I am talking into the mic. What we find is that money that is held by companies often gets used to either make their books look better, use it as a way to finance their business better. It looks good on their books, so they can, like, for instance, I think the Great Taking, he was talking about, or somebody was talking about how if you buy a car from a dealership, and even if you pay cash and it's paid for, they're still putting that car as part of their inventory in order to use it to leverage more credit from their creditors. Okay. Well, if they go belly up and that creditor calls in that debt, your car is part of that inventory, and that your car can then be collected as part of that debt. I think you can extend that into this idea of companies holding on to some money that's from one of your accounts, whether it's your bank account or a credit card account, and they can use that money as part of some sort of entry in their ledgers that accounts for money coming in, and they can leverage that either for more credit, or it makes it look better for their overall income, so that they can show their stockholders or their shareholders that they're doing better than they may actually be doing.
Exactly. So in the case of the gas station, I think what's happening is, the people that are running the companies that own the gas stations are they're on the hook, right? They have to pay their employees. They have to pay, the utilities to keep the lights on. They have to pay for the gas, obviously. So they're probably working in a system that is, that is debt. They're working in this sort of debt system that we've created. And so in order for their investors to say, well, it's worth it for us to keep your company running, but we need to see on the ledger that you've got all these charges that are pending, so that we can say, oh, look at all that money that's coming in. And that's where the consumer gets hit. So the consumer feels it from the relationship that the company owner and their creditors have. It's the consumer that's bearing the brunt of it. And so laws were passed that made it so that the consumer felt the brunt of it. Whereas I think before, there were laws that were passed that said you could not touch the consumer. So something happened in the last, say, 4 to 5 years, where these laws were inverted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So recently I had to go to Pittsburgh to continue what I call my dental journey. And I wrote about this quite extensively in a recent article that I published on my Substack page and also on my blog. But one of the things I noticed, and this is just going to be another illustration about the mundane. Okay, let me show you what Lyft says regarding pending charges. So when I fly into Pittsburgh, I have to take a Lyft to the hotel, and then I spend the night, and then I have to take 6 Lyft rides throughout the day to get me to 4 or 5 different appointments in one day. My appointments this is for my dental situation that I'm going through. My first appointment is with the periodontist. He checks me out. I have to take a lift over to my orthodontist, who then makes sure that my teeth are, strong and straight. And then I have to take a lift, maybe to go get some lunch. And then I take a lift to go see a general dentist. And then I might take a lift somewhere else. And then I'm back to the hotel. I have dinner. And then I take a lift the next day to go to the airport. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last few months, right? And I do this every 2 months. Well, I noticed that Lyft had charged me for all of my 6 Lyft rides that I took. They charged me. It came out of my bank account. It was authorized. It was one and done. It was completely done. And it was over $100 worth of Lyft rides. But I also noticed that there were 6 pending charges, even after they had already charged me and authorized it and the money was gone. There were these additional 6 Lyft charges. And they say right in their FAQ page where they talk about what is a pending charge, they say these pending charges can stay on your bank account for 5 to 7 days. So what I was noticing, so I started to research it a little bit, and I looked into what some people were complaining about. And Reddit is usually a good place to find the real stories. It's one thing to hear your asset, who is your favorite content creator, wax poetic about, what's going on with, the secret societies. But that's not the real world. If you want to hear what people, like individuals like you and me and real people are going through, maybe go to Reddit and just type in a general question. And so what I did is I typed in Lyft has got pending charges on my bank account or something like that. And there's a whole thread of people that are complaining. They've been defrauded. They've had to file what's it called when you dispute a charge?
Oh.
They've had to dispute charges for these pending charges because Lyft will charge them.
Mm-hmm.
It'll go through, and then they'll also get these additional pending charges, which don't make any sense. So the bank has to go in and dispute them. But so Lyft has covered their ass and said, you can't dispute it. You can't do anything about it. We're going to put a pending charge on your account for however much we want for 5 to 7 days. And then what that does is it tells their shareholders and their creditors and the people who fund them, the company based out of San Francisco, not the actual Lyft drivers. Let's not blame the Lyft drivers for this situation. This is a company policy that once again hurts the consumer and puts the consumer on the hook for the relationship that Lyft has with the creditors, just like we were talking about with the gas and the $175 that they hold on your card, even if you've already paid $40 for your tank to be filled, right? So this is so mundane and nobody talks about it because probably most of our audience doesn't take Lyft. You all probably have cars and you may not have experienced the hold on your debit card or your credit card when you're buying gas, or maybe you just pay cash for everything. And so you're not really experiencing this mundane chipping away of your financial stability.
It's not, and it's not happening everywhere. And I noticed that, driving across country in different.
Oh, right. When we were driving here to move here.
Yeah. I mean, I generally did not run into it. Occasionally, and it would be different types of gas stations. Sometimes it was a Speedway, sometimes it was a regular gas station, regular gas station like a Chevron or something, and sometimes it would be like a Love's, like a truck stop. I was surprised at that, I think it depends on its zip code. Honestly, I think I think that it's hitting the smaller, poorer communities more.
Right. So you're basically being punished for being poor. So in my case, what happened was, Lyft took all the money out of my account. The bank authorized it. It's one and done. Now I have half a dozen pending charges, and these charges affect my available balance. So say, this isn't how much I have in my account, but say I have $1,000 in my bank account that I can spend. According to Lyft, because of all these wacky charges, I only have that are pending, I only have, say, 800. So I could do one of two things. I could fight it and waste my energy because the bank is basically going to say, it doesn't matter. Lyft's policy says that they can do this. It's going to be a week before those charges fall off and your bank balance will then go back up. But you see how this is punishing the consumer? I guess this is where what we're trying to say is that you're punished for being a consumer. It's almost like you're punished for using a card instead of cash. And believe me, we have started using cash more than we ever have. If you read my recent Substack article or my recent blog post, you would see that I pay cash for as much as I can. So that is another way that we're experiencing this great taking. And it's so mundane and it's so boring and it sounds like we're complaining. But what we are is the consumer that is bearing the brunt of the relationship that the company has with their creditors. Why is it on the consumer's back to pay for these contracts that the creditors and the companies have?
Right. And, Julie could probably take a cab. There's not as many cabs available as there are Lyfts in Pittsburgh. There's cabs around here where we live now. There's probably more cabs around here in this small town than there were in Pittsburgh, a bigger city. But you've noticed that how Lyft and Uber have destroyed the taxi cab industry. You could pay cash to a taxi cab driver or use a card, but cash is fine. You can pay cash to a taxi driver. You cannot pay cash to a Lyft driver because it's all done online through your credit card or your debit card.
Right.
So these systems that have been promoted over other older systems stay with that debit card credit debt kind of situation, which feed into the ability for these companies to do these kinds of things to the consumer. They allow for that. And I think you can point back to the banks when they started they realized that they could make more money by charging little fees here and there than they ever could make from a consumer, from a retail bank situation with just a savings in a checking account. They're not going to make much money from you that way, but they will if they start charging you for this, that, and the other thing. And then if you make a mistake, they can charge you more. Then, I think we started seeing this happening with the hotels and that industry where, it was more of a security deposit that they were using as that kind of hold.
Right. They put a hold on your card, when you get a hotel, and then they actually put the charges through once you check out.
But I think this is morphed into, we can do it anywhere. We can do it anywhere in any kind of situation, and we can use that money. And we're speculating how this money is, because I can't see any reason why they would do it, because it seems to me there would be fees for them to do that kind of stuff in their own accounts. So they must be making some sort of incentive. There's an incentive for them to do this, not just to punish you.
It's so pervasive.
Yeah.
But it is on the backs of the consumers.
Right.
And the other thing too, which I think is and then I'm starting to creep into this sort of dystopian hysteria speak, which I really, really try not to do. But if they're going to do it at gas stations, and they're going to do it at hotels, and they're going to do it with Lyft, what's to stop them from doing it at your favorite cafe, where you go in and you throw down your debit card and you buy, a $10 breakfast, and you look on your account and you see that there's a $25 charge. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wait a minute, my breakfast was 10. Why is there $25? And they'll say, oh, well, we have to put a pending authorization. It'll fall off for an additional $15 or something like that.
Right.
So what's to stop them from doing that at grocery stores or even at farmers markets or cafes? That's why cash is king, right? You've got to pay cash for everything so that you can have money.
Yeah.
So that because and also the fraud that has come about in our lives over the last 5 years. I mean, we have had so much fraud take place on our checking accounts, our bank accounts, that it's seemed to coincide with these pending authorization charges. It's weird. It's like, are they using third-party systems? Are they using some sort of AI? Like, what are they doing that's causing there to be a vulnerability now in my account?
Yeah. Well, to answer this one or respond to this one area, I think that small businesses will not be doing this in the future, but your grocery store.
Might.
Well, Starbucks, of course.
Yeah.
Because they're corporations, and grocery stores are corporations. And I think that anytime you interface with the corporation and it's a consumer kind of relationship, that there's a possibility that these holes might happen. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, regarding the fraud, we were talking to the woman, the fraud person at our credit union. And she was talking about how fraud and identity theft and these things are becoming much more prominent and trickier to deal with, because organized crime is finding that it's a much better way to make money than drugs, or even drug cartels are starting to get into on the act.
So they go to what she told me they do is they go to she called it the black web.
The black web, the dark web.
They go to the dark web and they create fraudulent credit cards using social security numbers from people like me and you. And they're able to generate credit. They're able to open up bank accounts, get cash infusions. And they, with the help of AI. So, I mean, this is really, this financial taking, this great taking in the financial world. David Rogers Webb talks about things from, say, an investment or a
debt, basically.
A debt perspective, maybe through like the feds and all that. Okay, that's great, but then there's the real world. Then there's the things that you are experiencing that you don't even know about on a daily basis as you're living through your life. The amount of strain that your finances are put under just by wanting to put gas in your car or take a Lyft ride because you've got to get to a dentist appointment. It's the mundane is where it's really going to hit you. I mean, it's one thing if the feds are, creating all their kooky, crazy, whatever, which is what we read about in the book, The Great Taking. But there's also the real. There's also, just going to the grocery store and buying a bag of groceries is now $100 when it used to be $35, So things like that, the mundane that nobody thinks about.
I think that what you're talking about with the so-called inflation fits in with what he's talking about. It does
fit in with what he's talking about.
All this stuff fits in together to where the grift kind of overlaps and becomes really amorphous, and you're dealing with multiple circles overlapping each other in a life Venn diagram, right? And it's hard to tell where the grift is coming from at some point, and it gets so confusing that when the criminal element, I mean, not that corporations aren't criminals in the first place, but the true criminal element starts getting in on the act, then it gets really confusing. And these systems that they're able to manipulate and leverage, the criminals that is, are the systems that the so-called legitimate businesses and banking system set up in the first place. And now we're paying literally and figuratively for the mistakes and errors they made in creating such a shitty system in the first place.
Right. Basically, that's a good way to put it. And speaking of criminals, and then I'm going to start reading from the book, but one more thing I wanted to show you was how we personally have been affected YouTube demonetized our channel. So as you can see here, it says our team of policy specialists carefully looked over the videos you've uploaded to your channel, and we found that a significant portion of your channel is not in line with our YouTube Partner Program, or YPP policies. So as of today, your channel is not eligible to monetize, and you will not have access to monetization tools and features. So I can dispute this, but I have a feeling by disputing it, they're going to say, sure, we'll remonetize you. Just take down all your videos. And I know that a lot of content creators have done that. And then what they do is they continue their channel, and it gets monetized. And what they do is they do like a 20-minute talk where they talk about the mundane, or they talk about something that doesn't really matter. And then they say, okay, if you want to get to the meat of this, go see me over on Rumble. And so that way they're still able to get money from Google and YouTube. They haven't, broken any of the rules or whatever. And then they can continue to actually, talk about, make the content, or talk about what they really want to talk about. The problem I have with that is that it feels like they are self-censoring in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I know that everybody is trying to earn a living and all this stuff, but I don't know. I guess I'm just really rebellious, and I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this garbage.
I think what it comes down to is,
you
have to work extra hard now to maintain your income. And this is happening across the board. This is just an illustration of that, where content creators are now like, okay, so, we can't talk about this out in the open, but come over here and I'll, it's like a speakeasy of content.
Yeah.
Or, hey, you want to buy a watch?
Yeah,
in the dark alley, it's like,
it's so ridiculous because most of the stuff that these content creators are talking about is public knowledge anyway.
Right.
It's right on the various websites of the various agencies that are run by the federal government. It's on the various websites of your biotech or your pharmaceutical companies.
But YouTube will say, oh, you can't talk about that, even though it's
right there.
Right.
It's public
but
knowledge. They don't
want that out there. And it affects their bottom line, because you're talking about stuff that their true sponsors, the people who really make, spend money on YouTube, don't want you to know about, or don't want you talking about, because it just, it hurts their bottom line. Right. So it's all about the advertisers. It's all about the corporations that, they're doing all these nasty things to you. But we can't talk about that because that's bad for business. One last point. We never really made a lot of money from our monetization in the first place.
Oh, yeah,
we're not going to do what those other content creators are doing. We're just going to go, yeah, well, whatever, fuck off.
Yeah, well, whatever, because we never monetized our stuff on YouTube anyway.
The problem is, though, the others can make money from our content, which is the worst part of this.
Yeah, that is the worst part. Can you imagine other people are making money on our work and we're not making money on it?
We're not allowed to.
Yeah, that's the part that really burns.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to continue with the book.
And I'm going to say goodbye.
And so thank you for joining for the first half of this hour-long broadcast.
Yeah.
It was nice having you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye. So we finally made it through the prologue, as I mentioned earlier. And so now we're in, I guess it's chapter 1. He's calling it Introduction. And he has a Sun Tzu quote at the very top. And once again, I'm reading from David Rogers Webb's book called The Great Taking. And this was gifted to us by a patron. And I found it fascinating. And what I really love about it is that it's kind of a short read. So the Sun Tzu quote goes like this: "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." I love this quote in particular from Sun Tzu, and I'll tell you why. And it's going to sound kind of silly, but it's a story about my little brother and swimming lessons. So when my brother was a tiny baby, he had a terrible swim instructor who just threw him into the pool and he almost drowned. And ever since then, he's had a terrible fear of water. And he's, 7 years younger than me. So I guess he's in his, mid to upper 40s, right? So he's had a terrible fear of water. And so when he was a toddler, I would say 2, 3, 4 years old, maybe, it was once again time for swimming lessons. And he did what Sun Tzu talks about. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. And so what he did is once he got out of the car, he went limp. He just absolutely went limp. And he fell down into the parking lot and he said, "Oh, I'm having a heart attack." And he told my mom he was having a heart attack and he went completely limp. And my mom had to drag him across the parking lot into the pool area. And, you know, there was a better swim instructor there who was much more gentle and much more kind with small children. So, but he was definitely afraid. And so he just went limp. And so that's something that we should all be doing as we go through this great taking. We should just go limp. We should not spend as much time on social media so that they can't, cull or gather our personal information and our personal thoughts. Nobody cares what you had for dinner last night. Too much information is being shared and the state is using that against you. So maybe go limp on social media. Maybe start using cash, go limp with this whole credit debt bullshit and start using cash. So, we can go limp in different ways in the same way, and we can resist this without lifting a finger. Don't go to any protests because they are just crawling with FBI agents. Don't, say too much on social media. Who cares? Social media is nothing but a place, like I said, for them to gather your information and weaponize it against you. I would say do as my little brother did and do as Sun Tzu suggested, which is to, you can break the enemy's resistance without fighting, without lifting a finger. You can just say, "Oh, I just have to sit here and not do anything," because they're using your energy against you. You've been told your whole life that in order to fight the system, you must fight the system, and you must gather your army and gather your weapons and fight and expel all this energy. But I'm really telling you that it's a different paradigm now. So you must resist the enemy without fighting. Okay, let's read the book. So what is this book about? It is about the taking of collateral, all of it. The end game of this globally synchronous debt accumulation supercycle. This is being executed by long-planned intelligent design, the audacity and scope of which is difficult for the mind to encompass. Included are all financial assets, all money on deposit at banks, all stocks and bonds, and hence all underlying property of all public corporations, including all inventories, plant and equipment, land, mineral deposits, inventions, and intellectual property. Privately owned personal and real property financed with any amount of debt will be similarly taken, as will the assets of privately owned businesses which have been financed with debt. If even partially successful, this will be the greatest conquest and subjugation in world history. We are now living within a hybrid war conducted almost entirely by deception, and thus designed to achieve war aims with little energy input. It is a war of conquest, directed not against other nation states, but against all of humanity. Private, closely held control of all central banks, and hence of all money creation, has allowed a very few people to control all political parties, governments, intelligence agencies, and their myriad front organizations, the armed forces, the police, the major corporations, and of course, the media. These very few people are the prime movers. Their plans are executed over decades. Their control is opaque. When George Soros said to me, "You don't know what they can do," it was these people to whom he referred. Now, to be absolutely clear, it is these very few people who are hidden from you, who are behind this war against humanity. You may never know who they are. The people you are allowed to see are the hired face men and face women. They are expendable. Tucker Carlson, maybe. One might seek comfort in thinking that this must be crazy. Nothing like this has ever happened before, but it has. The precedent for the intent, design, and horrific execution of such a plan can be found by examining the early 20th century, the period of the Great Wars and the Great Depression. The proclaimed Great Reset, now in progress, however, includes major innovations which will allow unprecedented concentration of wealth and power over humanity through deprivation. How might it come to pass that you will own nothing, as so boldly predicted by the World Economic Forum? It certainly is not about the personal convenience of renting. With the collapse of each financial bubble and the ensuing financial crisis, a story is rolled out, which should now be familiar to you. It goes like this: all of us are at fault. This is something that I really tried to drive home with, especially during 2020 when we were experiencing, the beginnings of the Great Taking. You are alive, therefore you are guilty of something. We just wanted too much and we were living beyond our means. And now our collective greed has caused this terrible global crisis. He's being sarcastic here. The authorities or the regulators had struggled mightily to protect us from our own animal spirits. Their great and elaborate efforts having been demonstrated through decades of work. Despite their good intentions, however, they failed and can't be blamed or prosecuted for that. After all, we are all to blame. In any case, let's look forward. The financial system must be restarted so that we can provide credit to you again, create the jobs, and get the economy growing, whatever it takes. This time, what it will take is all of your property, or what you thought was your property. Here is your central bank digital currency deposited on your smartphone so that you can buy milk. Noblesse oblige. Money is an extremely efficient control system. People order themselves upon money incentives, and thus difficult, dangerous, and energy-intensive overt physical control need not be employed broadly. But the money control system breaks down at the end of a monetary supercycle with collapse in the velocity of money, or the VOM. Remember I told you in part 1, I said you're going to want to look up that term, velocity of money. This is a multi-decade process. Velocity is the number of times that a unit of currency is spent to buy goods and services in a period of time. This is measured by comparing the value of all goods and services produced in a period of time. Your gross domestic product, or your GDP, a term you all know, I hope, with the value of all cash and deposits, which can be used nearly as easily as cash, which is considered money supply. So the velocity equals the GDP over the money supply. Thus, velocity times money supply equals GDP. Lower velocity results in lower GDP. Milton Friedman was an economist noted for the study of monetary history. In his book, A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960, co-authored with Anna Schwartz, we find the following observation. We know enough to demonstrate rather conclusively that the velocity of money must have declined sharply from 1880 to World War I. Collapsing velocity of money is exactly what was unfolding from the 19th century and leading up to the Great War. Within a few years, the Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires ceased to exist, as did the Qing dynasty, Qing. The German economy was destroyed. Then followed the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the slow collapse of the British Empire. No populations were unscathed. There were no winners. Or were there? While there was widespread deprivation, selected banking interests took the collateral of the thousands of banks which were forced to close, as well as of a great many people in business, large and small, the indebted. In the U.S., gold held by the public was confiscated. But most importantly, closely held secretive private control of central banks and money creation was maintained, as was the aforementioned control over society's key institutions, including political parties, governments, intelligence agencies, armed forces, police, major corporations, and media. The heirs to this control position have known for many decades that such a collapse in velocity of money would come again. They have been preparing. For them, it is an absolute imperative to remain in control through the collapse and the Great Reset. Otherwise, they risk being discovered, investigated, and prosecuted. They are not doing it for us. There is no noble purpose. We are now living within a replay of this monetary phenomenon, i.e., a profound decline in velocity of money, which began when velocity peaked in 1997. This was coincident with onset of a major global financial crisis known as the Asian financial crisis, and it was followed within a few years by the dot-com bubble and bust. Throughout this period, I was managing long and short equity hedge funds, and I developed the insight that the Federal Reserve was influencing the direction of financial markets. This was considered conspiracy theory, even by my partners. At that time, it was done through open market operations conducted by the New York Fed using repurchase agreements on Treasury securities. I began systematically following the rate of growth in M3, the broadest measure of money at the time, which is no longer published. I studied what was unfolding incrementally, and I saw that in individual weeks, new money created was more than 1% of the annual U.S. GDP. This was when it first occurred to me that the Fed was getting less bang for the buck, and that GDP was not responding to money creation. This meant that the velocity of money was inverting, and that money growth was now much higher than the GDP growth. You can't just make money without backing it with something. You got to back it with gold. You got to back it with something. But they were just making the money without any GDP growth. The money being created was not going into the real economy, but it was driving a financial bubble with no relationship to underlying economic activity. I understood this, not with hindsight, but in near real time. If I could know it, Alan Greenspan and the people he worked if I could know it, Alan Greenspan and the people he worked for knew it too. So why did they do it? If something does not make sense, it is necessary to change one's perspective and aim for a larger understanding. Crises do not occur by accident. They are induced intentionally and used to consolidate power and to put in place measures which will be used later. By the fourth quarter of 1999, when the dot-com bubble was reaching extremes, I saw that the money supply was being increased at more than a 40% annual rate. I knew that this meant that the velocity of money was collapsing. Such a collapse occurs when the economy is not growing despite very high rates of money creation. Just as a side note, during the dot-com bubble and bust, I met so many young, like 20-something millionaires, practically billionaires, who had these like bullshit, ideas and bullshit apps, and they were just getting flush with funding. And then they were selling their ideas and selling their apps or designs over to like Google or Microsoft or something. And so then they were retiring by like age 30. And this was in the dot-com bubble and then the corresponding bust. So it was crazy. The amount of money that was coming through San Francisco was insane at that time. Money was collapsing. Such a collapse occurs when the economy is not growing, despite very high rates of money creation. Please observe the extremely important chart in figure 1.1, which was prepared by Hoisington Management. For once, one can see a true underlying dominant of the sweep of history. Well, I don't have a way to show you the chart, but it's really interesting. So you'll have to get the book. Profound decline in velocity of money led to the financial panic of 1907, which was used to justify the establishment of the Federal Reserve System. Isn't it interesting that San Francisco experienced a major earthquake in 1906 and that there was a financial panic of 1907? The Federal Reserve Act was passed by Congress in the quiet days before Christmas of 1913. Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated 6 months later. Following a brief recovery in the velocity of money during the Great War, it collapsed further, leading to the closure of banks and the confiscation of gold in 1933. Velocity of money recovered somewhat into the Second World War and then collapsed to a low in 1946, unprecedented until now. Velocity of money has now contracted to a lower level than at any point during the Great Depression and the World Wars. Once the ability to produce growth by printing money has been exhausted, creating more money will not help. It is pushing on a string. The phenomenon is irreversible. And so, perhaps, the announcement of the Great Reset has been motivated not by global warming or by profound insights into a fourth industrial revolution, but rather by certain knowledge of the collapse of this fundamental monetary phenomenon, the implications of which extend far beyond economics. Something has been planned for us, but not for the reasons you have been given. How might we come to know something about the intentions of the planners? Perhaps by examining their preparations. And so that ends chapter 1. Let's read what BC says. There is a Deltron 3030 song called Virus that begins with an excerpt that says global controls will have to be imposed. Right. So this is basically what he said in chapter 1, and I'll try to summarize as best as I can. What it seems to me is that, the entire system was a velocity of money, had nothing to back it. And so as we move forward in time, it just got worse and worse and worse until by the time 2020 hit, it was like, okay, this is not sustainable financially. So let's fake a pandemic and let's fake global warming and do all this, stupid shit with politics and elections, and let's throw Putin out in front of people and let Tucker Carlson interview him and everybody blah, 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 blah. When really what's happening is the shit that I talked about that happened to me, where, everything is designed to just, pull everything out of you, your health, your money. Since the velocity of money is so extreme now, and there's nothing to back the money that they're printing, you are now the thing that they're backing. You, the humans, which is why, in my opinion, they're creating like a new slave type of society, right? But once again, you get into this existential question of like, if we're all slaves and we don't feel like slaves, like as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to go outside in the bright sunshine and go stand by the sea. And, do I feel like a slave? No. I mean, but if you're a slave because of what he's talking about in the Great Taking, which is the taking of your life, not just your assets, but your lifeblood, your life source, then, and you don't realize it, then are you a slave if you don't know? If you're happy? It's hard. These are I keep asking these questions over and over and over again, So, I'll read that last chapter or that last paragraph again. Something has been planned for us, but not for the reasons you have been given. How might we come to know something about the intentions of the planners? Perhaps by examining their preparations. So we will continue this next Friday at 10 o'clock, and we'll start to learn about those preparations in chapter 2, I imagine. I haven't read the book yet all the way through. I glanced at it and, some key points about his idea around debt really spoke to me and really resonated with me. The title of the book really resonated with me because one of the things that we had said, when we did a video for the public called Hard Reset, and this was before the term the Great Reset had even come about. We did this at the very, very beginning, and I said, this is a great taking. This is like they have dropped you. All the things that you had come to understand about what it means to go to school or what it means to go to the doctor or what it means to use your money to get through life and what it means to use your computer. And all these things have now been inverted. They've dropped, either regulation. Remember when we said at the beginning of this broadcast today for the first 30 minutes that the mundane is going to be the thing that just it's like death by 1,000 cuts, which is often how I refer to my strenuous relationship with YouTube that keeps taking down my content and has now demonetized my channel. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You're not really going to feel it, and you're going to feel that you have other places you can go and other ways that you can make it work, but really the entire system is engulfed in this fabricated velocity of money that David Rogers Webb talks about in The Great Taking. It literally is a great taking. And so the Great Reset was like a cutesy, cartoony term to act as cover for the Great Taking, the taking of so much. Why is it that my good friend that I've known for, since I was a teenager, why is it that he followed all the rules? He never went into debt. He always had money in the bank. He got his master's degree. He went through all the proper channels. He always paid his rent on time. He did everything right as a human being. All the expectations that were put upon him growing up, he met those expectations. Why is he homeless? Because it's a great taking. None of those things that you have been told your entire life that you have to do in order to have financial stability or be a success or gain respect from your peers, none of those things apply anymore. It's all inverted. It's all different now. That's why you have to take a good look at your own life and do what you feel is necessary. I mean, the part where he talks about in the book that I just read, in the first chapter I just read, where in the past they confiscated citizens' gold. People go and buy gold now and coins and metal in order to have something so that if there is a major financial collapse, which looks like we're kind of in one in free fall, that they'll at least have something, that they can trade for, to live their life. But if that's been confiscated, then what do you do? What can you possibly do? And I think one of the things that he's trying to impress upon us with this book is to get out of the entire system that creates money, even cash, as a way to get what you need. And I think he's I heard him talk a few weeks ago, very briefly, and I think he said something about like the barter system, which is very anarchist, which is a system of, the community coming together with their various talents and supporting each other. But that's not very realistic. It takes money to live. And right now, cash is really the only, even if cash is valueless now because of what we're learning in this book, The Great Taking. And even if cash is considered valueless, I would say it's better than it's the best thing we have right now, I guess is what I'm saying. So you've got to go with what you can, right? You've got to just use it. Because I don't know how I'm supposed to pay my mortgage if I bake bread for somebody. How is my mortgage going to get paid? You see what I'm saying? So you have got to work within a system that works for you in order to circumvent the stresses that this great taking and it is stress. So the next week I'll start with chapter 2. It's called Dematerialization, and he starts every chapter with a Sun Tzu quote. So next week it's going to be Dematerialization. All warfare is based on deception. That is another really good Sun Tzu quote. So I'll pick this up again next Friday, 10 o'clock Central Time, because we're on the Central Time Zone now. We're on the Gulf Coast. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. And I look forward to your comments. And I want to thank you so much for your support, for sharing. And I definitely want to say, a very heartfelt thank you to the patron who sent me this book. It's been such a joy reading it. And I will look forward to next week. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.